Welcome everybody to the 25th episode of the Clements Bookworm. Can you believe it? I'm Angela Unk, Director of Development at the Clements Library. I just want to remind everybody that we are recording today's episode to share online. And this afternoon, you will receive an email with a link to the recording and to the resources that are mentioned during today's broadcast. Just a quick tutorial in case we have anyone new to Zoom. Please continue to chime in the chat section. Select all panelists and attendees so that we can all see your remarks. The conversation goes by very quickly, as you see. So when you have a question for our panelists, put that in the Q&A section. There you can ask your questions. You can also, if you see somebody else's question, give it a thumbs up if it's a question you have as well. That will give it an upvote and reorder the questions so that we know which ones to focus on first. And if you have comments or answers that should go along with the question, you can use the comment to keep those with that question. So please continue to use that. You'll notice that we have the live transcription turned on, and this is part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. So if you don't find it helpful, you can go to live transcription along the bottom and hide those subtitles, and you can change the font slightly. So if you would like to do that, please do so. In addition, I can only control so much of what you see. So we have side-by-side mode enabled, so you can slide you can show the people at the same time, and you can slide to make it larger or smaller. So please play around with that a little bit if what you're viewing is not what you think it would be best. In addition, my colleagues Ann Bennington-Helber and Tracy Pejovic are helping out on the chat. They'll be monitoring that, helping to answer your questions and monitor the conversation, as well as providing helpful links along the way. This program is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The Clements Library enables the discovery, learning, and teaching of American history through the collection, conservation, digitization, and availability of primary sources on paper. And we're so happy to have you join us today. Thank you. Really quickly, everybody, try to click your answers on the poll question because we're about to close that out. I want to mention and thank Kate Moore for generously sponsoring today's episode. Thank you, Kate. We appreciate your sponsorship very much. All right, click quickly, everybody, because I'm going to close the poll question. But if you're just joining us, we still want to hear your stories in the chat. So you can keep telling them there. All right, I'm going to end the polling, share the results. And what we talked about this morning is what kinds of strange and dramatic stories you might have found while researching your family history or the history of your house. And it looks like the majority of people who responded haven't found any of these stories yet. So maybe you'll be inspired to dig a little deeper after today's panelists share their stories with us. But there do seem to be lots of good connections to pivotal historical events and relations to famous people. So that's fun. So thanks everybody for sharing that with us. Today's episode is about writing and publishing inspired by genealogical research. And I'm really thrilled to welcome our three panelists today. Hopefully, Kay Miller is going to be able to join us by phone. She was having a little bit of trouble connecting before. So we'll keep going and hope that it's going to work out. I want to introduce our first panelist. And as I introduce everybody, I would love to first have everybody answer a question about what led you to embark upon this journey of historical research. So I'll start with Wendy. Wendy Chapin Ford came late to the study of poetry, following a career of financial and corporate speechwriting. Her book, A Frontier Romance, Tiger, Bill, and Kate, contains poetry inspired by her great-grandparents' story. She is a graduate of the University of Michigan and lived across the street from the Clements Library in the Martha Cook dormitory. In fact, we'd like to welcome all the cookies who have joined us today as well. So thanks so much for being here. And Wendy, can you tell us a little bit more about what drew you to explore your family history?
Sure. I knew that there was a rather beloved, colorful judge in the family on my father's side, and in the Wild West days of early Kansas. And I tried to look into it in the 1980s. Oh, I'm dating myself there, but it was before the internet. And then I got busy, life intervened, and I dropped the ball for a few years. But what really got me going more recently was finding out that my great granny had to elope when she was 16 because her father did not approve the marriage. And I thought that was a rather delicious factoid. So that really sort of got me going.
Right. Oh, thank you. Well, we look forward to hearing more.
Oh, there's Kay.
I know. I'm trying to see. I see I've got one person calling in, but I don't know if I can promote somebody who is a call. So let me look. Kay, is that you by any chance? Let's see. All right.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there's Kay. Oh, yay. We have Kay on the phone. Okay. I'm going to introduce you, Kay. I just wanted to make sure that I could get you on the phone. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Kay is a longtime volunteer who has worked in the manuscripts division at the Clements Library. And in fact, in 2021, she'll be celebrating her 10-year anniversary. Kay is a retired nurse in emergency services and a genealogical sleuth who utilizes her skills to provide critical details, stories, and connections to the manuscript materials at the Clements. So I'm so excited that we finally figured out at least part of our technical difficulties and have you on the phone. You've long been active in genealogical research of your own family, but today you'll be talking about your work on behalf of the Clements Library. So tell us what you enjoy about this kind of research.
I enjoy being detective and finding answers. It's like solving a problem, and I do solve problems. And that is the most exciting part, when I do find information that broadens the scope of the collection and adds another dimension to it. So that's very satisfying to me.
Oh, thank you. We can't wait to hear more about it. So um, next, I'll introduce Sarah Messer. She is an American poet and author and was raised in Marshfield, Massachusetts in the Hatch homestead, a house built in the 17th century that was the subject of her book, Red House, being a mostly accurate account of New England's oldest continuously lived-in house. She's a lecturer in the Creative Writing and Literature program at the University of Michigan Residential College. Welcome, Sarah. So what led you down the research path that culminated in this book?
Well, as you said, I was raised in the Hatch house, which was built by Walter Hatch in 1647. And there's a will that the original will for the house stipulated that the house should never be passed, never be sold or mortgaged from my children and grandchildren forever. Like it should be passed down or sold. Anyway, it stayed in the family. They obeyed that will until 1965 when my parents bought it from a descendant, Richard Warren Hatch. And so the strange situation, though, is that Mr. Hatch wound up giving our family, like my father and my mother and, you know, my siblings, like all of the Hatch ephemera, like Bibles, all the old wills, ledgers, photographs. And so I grew up really with someone else's history, like all around me. Right after college, I worked for Yankee magazine, and I actually had a job driving around New England writing about old houses. That was my job. And I forget, Mel Allen, who's now the editor of Yankee, he's a dear friend, and he was a mentor to me. And I think I was stuck trying to find something to write about. And he said, well, you know, you're always talking about your house. Why don't you write about that? And so I did write an article for Yankee. Again, I didn't really have to do much research except for to go into my dad's study and like look at all these documents. So from there, the book kind of evolved, and after that, I did have to do a lot of research, but that's where it started. So with the place I grew up.
That's great. So I'm looking forward to talking with you more about that. So thanks so much for being here. So Wendy, we are definitely intrigued to learn more about your great-grandparents' story. So tell us when you first learned about their elopement.
Well, one year, out of the blue, this book, Dear Wife, just popped through the mail slot. And it turned out, I had no idea what it was. It turned out to be an account of my great-great-grandfather, Union Colonel Sidney Barnes's Civil War experience. This is Kate of Kate and Tiger Bill. This is Kate's father, a very imposing figure. So another branch of the family had inherited a cache of letters that he had written and sent home from the front, from the Civil War front, to his wife and family back in Kentucky. And a cousin that I'd never known had published the book. Maud Miller is actually the mother of Franklin, cousin Franklin Miller, who published the book. And he very generously tracked down 200 other descendants of Colonel Barnes. So when I contacted cousin Franklin out in Gambier, Ohio, he was actually some of you who study physics may know of him. He's a rather renowned, was a rather renowned physics professor at Kenyon. And I told him how captivated I was by the elopement and Kate's, spirit. He said, well, that's not the half of it, and went on to offer up some pretty fabulous oral history. So I was just, I was just delighted.
Oh, I love it. So you need to tell us then what happened.
Well, the Colonel, excuse me, the Colonel with Kate's brother Tom after Kate and Bill had taken off on horseback, gave chase on horseback with guns to the Cumberland River, where Bill and Kate would ferry over to Tennessee, where they'd be free to marry. On the way, there was a point at which they had to go in one of two distinct directions. Tom got there first, and then the colonel galloped up and barked which way they go, and Tom pointed in the opposite direction that they'd actually taken. So this is where we say bless his heart, you know.
That is amazing, and it's so fun that the story was passed down in your family, and that you were able to capture it. But what we really need to ask is, what prompted you to convey this history through poetry?
Well, I just kept learning about their lives, Tiger, Bill, and Kate, more and more. When my youngest, my daughter Lindsay, left for college for the University of Michigan, where she also lived at Martha Cook, I was more free to travel and decided to go to Dallas to visit my Aunt Lynette, who was Tiger, Bill, and Kate's last surviving grandchild and the family historian. She was about 90 years old at that point. She had more stories about Tiger Bill, more fabulous oral history, and a file of clippings from the Wichita papers from the 1930s. Their writers loved to interview, oh, there he is there's Tiger Bill in his GAR uniform. He was very devoted to the Grand Army of the Republic. He was a Unionist, of course. And then in the other photograph, the group photo, he's second from the left, and this is a banquet that was held in his honor at the old Wichita Club, which no longer exists, on the occasion of his 90th birthday in 1935, where lawyers and judges from all over Kansas, more than 125 of them, assembled in his honor, and he said it was one of the happiest days of his life. So the writers, just from those Wichita papers, loved to interview him in his later years because he was such a beloved pioneer character. So I just learned so much about their lives, the drama, the tragedy. There were death threats, county wars, showdowns with marauding gangs up from Texas. But I wasn't sure I would find enough material to write a complete narrative. But I had learned about all of these dramatic episodes, and so I thought, well, maybe if I could learn enough about poetry, I could capture these episodes in poetry. And
so had you been writing poetry before that? How long had you been writing?
No, in fact, I didn't know anything about poetry until just a few years ago. Fortunately, I was able to study with a couple of renowned formalist poets, whom I must name here because they are very dear and wonderful teachers and fabulous poets who live right here in my town in Massachusetts. Rena Espaillat and Alfred Nicole.
Lovely. That is very what a nice way, to learn something new and to do something new. Did your research go smoothly? I don't know how many people watched our episode of the Bookworm in October, but we talked about how information is often lost, dispersed, or even sold.
Well, yes and no. On that last visit with my aunt in Dallas, she told me that another branch of the family in Wichita had inherited Tiger Bill's papers. But then I returned to Boston area, and sadly, she then passed away not long after that. And I did not know how to reach those cousins. I didn't even know their names. But I had to get my hands on those papers. So I turned to the internet and I learned that another family member had passed away sometime before. And I asked the mortuary to put the family in touch with me, hoping that I could persuade them to part with the papers, even temporarily.
And, and did that happen?
It did happen. It did. After many, many gentle entreaties. I mean, these were the most diplomatically worded emails you could imagine. And it wasn't that they were being difficult. It's just that I think one of them was ill, and she was the one who actually had the papers, and then her. It was just a little. It was a little bit of disorganization and lack of coordination. But ultimately, they came, which was fabulous.
That is fabulous. And so what did you find in those?
Well, I think my favorite entry was a letter from 1902 that I held in my hands that Tiger Bill, on a visit back to Kentucky, wrote to Kate. And what he wrote, the opening line was, "The first place I went to see was the old Vickery place. I went to the gate where we stood on a Sunday afternoon a long time ago." End quote. Now, I don't know what happened there. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to, because he was writing to Kate. Only those two knew. And of course, there's no way to find out exactly what happened now. But I knew that that was a nugget. And it launched one of the poems, Leave Taking. So you'll just have to get hold of the book to find out.
Well, I know in my reading of the book, I was really drawn in by the section about temperance. Can you talk a little more about that?
That was really fun to work on because it was so wild. Western ballads. The governor of Kansas had asked Tiger Bill to, this is a photo of a drawing of Tiger Bill in his early years. That was probably his Civil War years. Anyway, the governor asked Tiger Bill to clean up the vice situation in Wichita, which was a thankless task. It was so controversial. So, he made more enemies. There were more death threats. There was an attempt to ensnare him in a house of ill repute, which was the basis for what I think of as the funniest poem in the collection. There was an attempt to disbar him on baseless charges of boodle. There were sham trials of jurists, who offered up outrageous defenses, being caught in saloons, for example, claiming to have been drinking only elephant's milk. So.
Yeah, so that certainly was a wild time for
it was very raucous, and
yes.
The trials and
So are there any more favorite highlights from your research?
A couple, sure. The sonnet Cyclone, about an early tragedy when Bill and Kate lived in a sod house in Butler County after they first arrived at Kansas, would have been a mere footnote in history had my aunt not provided the detail. So the historical record reads only, "Infant died in a storm."
Wow. That was a terrible tragedy and is such a beautiful sonnet. Would you read it for us today?
Sure, it's just a sonnet, so it's only 14 lines. Cyclone, El Dorado, 1871. The day began like all the rest out here, but there was something different with the sky. The air was thick and strange. I knew not why. My babes were clinging close and torn with fear. The breeze first seemed like whispers drawing near, but built raging winds then by and by. We gathered close to pray and to defy this storm that threatened all that was so dear. The wind, its fury full, would not abate. It shut our eyes and stole our breath to fling us all to chaos, dust, and darkness. Fate, too harsh to reconcile. Dear God, this sting is dire. I had a babe in arms of late. No greater grief this barren land could bring.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. That's beautiful and so, so sad.
Thanks. I'm amazed. I don't always get through that without misting up.
Yeah. Um, so are there any other, uh,
There is there is one poem that I would especially like to draw attention to, for those of you who are lucky enough to acquire this book. It's the poem Stirrings, which is bursting with oral history from my aunt. And this is where I give my great-great-grandmother, Tiger Bill's mother, who's pictured there with her second husband, Captain Kelly, who was a Unionist, I'm sure. It's a dreadful story, actually. Nancy Emerson Campbell was widowed young with 3 young boys to rear, and she became a skilled milliner. She made these beautiful hats that, according to my aunt, everyone wanted. That strength and resourcefulness enabled her to ensure that her sons attended the best schools in Eastern Kentucky, and they all went on to become U.S. attorneys. Yet she was looked down upon by Kate's family as not being up to their social level. And they didn't want her sons coming round for Kate, which is exactly what happened. I'm delighted to.
oh boy.
Spoiler alert.
Right, exactly, exactly. Um, so is there anything in your work that ties to what we're going through today, living through a historical pandemic?
As a matter of fact, yes. Sadly, Kate died in the flu epidemic that preceded the pandemic of 1918.
Oh,
So,
that's a tragedy too. Um, so you really immersed yourself in the story of your great grandparents. How did you come to feel about these two after studying them so closely for so long?
well, I really drew close to them. I mean, I really felt as though I got to know them in a way because I was immersing myself in their history. And, you know, when you're writing poetry, you're trying to be in their moment and try to imagine what they're thinking and feeling and experiencing. So it was pretty intense. Um, they just bowled me over, you know, their strength and courage and devotion to one another. But I think what charmed me most came out in those interviews with Tiger Bill in his last years, when the writers from the Wichita papers would get him reminiscing about, you know, life on the old frontier. They just loved this, you know, beloved old pioneer character. And, you know, I think we all know that women in history are not always given their proper due. Yet Tiger Bill never failed to give Kate the immense credit that she so deserved. Um, and I just hope that comes across in the final poem, The Way Home, which allowed me to offer up much more about Kate based on those interviews where he, you know, divulged uh, bits and pieces of information about her and their life together as he remembered her in his bereavement, and how crucial she was to, you know, their life's adventure. He never did remarry. I mean, it was truly a great pioneer love story. He remained widowed. He lived on more than 20 years without her.
Oh, it is a lovely love story. So thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm honored. And I'm delighted that all the old cookies are out there too.
Right, right. And I'll just remind everybody to, as you think of questions for our panelists, to put those in the Q&A section and we'll answer them at the end. So, um, I am delighted now to talk with Sarah Messer. Uh, Sarah, I your book, you explore the complexity of a home being more than just a home that provides shelter, but also how it provides identity, heritage, community. So, can you share with us a little bit more about the story of the Red House?
Sure. I think I'm going to start just by reading the first paragraph or two of the book, which kind of gives a historical overview of just the magnitude of a house this old. Again, it was built in 1647 in Marshfield, Massachusetts. So this picture that you're seeing now is the house, the Red House, circa 1900. Um, Before the highway, the oil slick, the outflow pipe, before the blizzard, the sea monster, the Girl Scout camp, before the nudist colony and flower farm, before the tidal wave broke the river's mouth, salting the cedar forest, before the ironworks, tack factory, and shoe peg mill, before the landing where skinny dipping white boys jumped through berry bushes, before hayfield, ferry, oyster bed, before Daniel Webster's horses stood buried in their graves, before militiamen's talk of separating, before Unitarians and Quakers, the shipyards and mills, the 19 barns burned in the Indian raid, even then the Hatches had already built the Red House. The surname Hatch most commonly means a half door or gate, an entrance to a village or manor house. It describes a person who stands by the gate, a person newly born, a person who waits. My father could not wait. He had made an appointment with a real estate agent, but when he found himself on a house call in Marshfield, Massachusetts, he decided to see the Red House himself. It was August 1965.
Wow. So,
So as I've said, like this house had been in the same family since it was built by Walter Hatch and Richard Warren Hatch, who one of our panelists wrote to say her father taught with Richard Warren Hatch at Deerfield Academy. He decided to sell it out of the family. And, you know, my dad and my mom were both not from New England. They had a huge kind of class leap to come to this place, and to, my dad was the first person to go to college. His parents didn't graduate from high school. He went to Harvard on football scholarship. He was a math major and then went to Harvard Medical School. So he really, he and my mom both wanted to really recreate themselves. And so it really is this kind of like two American stories coming together of like the old New England family, kind of, the Hatches weren't on the Mayflower, but it was pretty close. They weren't separatists. They weren't like the Pilgrims, meaning they weren't separating from Puritan England, but they were coming to New England to make a new life. And so there's that history of old New England. And then there's my family, which is kind of like almost like a Great Gatsby sort of story of that American story of like, you can remake yourself and you can be whatever you want in America. So that's the two stories that are kind of coming together in the book.
thank you. And I just love that introduction where we feel like we're going back in time. Um, so I know, speaking of going back in time, this might set that stage a little bit too.
Yeah, so this is an old map of, it's kind of upside down a little bit from the way that we look at it now, but it's an old map of New England and Cape Cod. And you can see the big hook coming into the ocean is Cape Cod. So this Marshfield would be, for those of you who don't know New England, it's between Plymouth Colony, which is right at the tip of the Cape, and Boston. So between Boston and Plymouth, Marshfield is on the ocean, although the Red House is sitting on the North River, which flows into the ocean. So here's a picture of the North River. And so the North River, up until 1898, when there was a big storm that blew the mouths of the North and South River together, actually. And then when it did that, it opened up a huge, bigger mouth for the ocean to come in. And so this river became brackish, became a tidal river. But this is a picture around the 1900s of what the river looked like. And these are salt hay fields, and these are big, you know, what do you call those? Bales, bales of salt hay that they're harvesting. And it was really a deep river, but it was great because it was so flat, and then the water was really deep. So it was perfect for shipbuilding. And the early hatches were shipbuilders on the North River, and there's several shipbuilding sites along the North River that you can still see that are marked with signs today. And the hatches were also mill workers because they needed, you know, stuff to build the ships, the timber and things like that. So they made a series of ponds in Marshfield and had mills along the ponds on the way to the river.
So this picture that you're sharing with this, is this one of those things that was left with the house?
Yeah, well, this is actually a photograph of a painting. And so it was a pretty big photograph that was left with the house, but I don't know the person who painted this painting, but it is a painting, really lifelike. And you can see the very flat boats that they would use to carry. They did a lot of moving of things up and down the river on these flat boats. And then here's a flat boat, similar boat. Then this man with the big long beard is Israel H. Hatch, and he lived in the Red House. He died in 1921. And in this picture, to his left, there's 4 children, and the tallest boy standing with the little ears sticking out is Richard Warren Hatch, and his younger brother, Tracy. So this is Israel Hatch with his grandchildren on the river. You can see behind him, there's some trees. There's like some pine trees that have died and cedar trees. And that's because when the ocean rushed in and it became a tidal river, it killed a bunch of the forest. It flooded the salt hay fields, which are now cattail marshes, and you know, they're swampy now. But those ghost-like cedar trees and pine trees that died, it's almost like they got preserved. They're still there. You can still see them on the river from that 1898 storm.
Right, right.
This is a picture of the Hatch Mill that was built in 1752. There were quite a few Israel hatches in the line of the Red House. The book itself it goes back and forth between the history of even the land before the house was built, and then in the First Peoples indigenous tribes that were there. Josiah Wampatuck was the chief who sold the land to the Hatches, and at the Massachusetts Historical Society, you can see his mark, his X, on that original deed, and that's pretty amazing to see. So the book follows the land and then Walter and each person who lived in the house, and there were a lot of Israels. One of the Israels built this Hatch Mill, which looks like kind of falling down right now, but it's been restored by some wonderful people in Marshfield, and it's a historic site along with the Red House. And this was the one that Israel with the big beard used to work at the mill. His dad, Deacon Joel, was really one of the main people who ran the mills, and the mill was very prosperous, and Israel was not as enthusiastic about working in the mills. And I know this because I've read his diaries, and he just wasn't really a worker. He was more of a thinker, I would say. So this is a picture of Richard Warren Hatch, and this is around the time that he was teaching in Deerfield. So for our guest who whose dad taught what this is probably what he looked like. And he's sitting in front of the red house on this big granite slab. And one of the things that we started talking about was that my room in the house was called the mourning and borning room, where people would go to convalesce or die, and maybe women would give birth in that room. And it didn't have a fireplace, so it really wasn't a room that people slept in at the time, but it was my room. And which maybe is perfect for making a writer or a poet. But all of the rooms are kind of interconnected. It's not, it's because it's such an old house, it has a central chimney, and so the rooms kind of circle around it like a little beehive, where you're kind of going through rooms to get to other rooms. And we were talking about how when my mother and father first moved in, my mother was pregnant with me and my twin sister, and she would hear a baby ghost crying if she was home at night. My dad was working late, which he often did in those days. He was establishing his business. He was a doctor in town. So she'd be alone in the red house, and she would hear a baby crying. And so then she would walk upstairs to what was my room, and then the baby would stop when she would walk in the room. And she asked Mr. Hatch about it, and he said, "Oh, it's just a baby ghost, like just like it's a blue sky. It's like a baby ghost. And, there's so many babies were born and died in the house, and I'm sure it's just lonely, and it's waiting for you to have more babies." And when she did have me and my twin sister, apparently the baby ghost stopped crying. So
did you ever experience a ghost?
well, I did technically experience a ghost, but I don't remember it. There is a funny story in the book about, I had a new boyfriend, and he had never been to the house before. And in the 1990s, the late 90s, my sister Kim and her husband Philippe, Philippe is French and Kim is an artist. She's my oldest sister. She and Philippe are big characters in the book because they oversaw all the restoration in the 90s, and I was a part of that work. And so they're characters, and they were at the Red House, and my parents weren't there, but the house had been kind of torn apart a little bit because they were rebuilding the sill and redoing the windows and everything. So we arrived, let's just call my boyfriend Joe. We arrived late. And in the morning, he said, "That was so strange when Philippe came in and talked to you last night." And I said, "What do you mean? I don't remember." And he said, "Yeah, you were saying," he was standing by our bed, and you were saying, "Oh, everything will be put back where it was. Don't worry, everything will be fine. And we're just fixing the house, and it's going to be better." And I was thinking to myself, like, I don't remember seeing Philippe. Joe had never met Philippe. And I said, "Well, what did he look like?" And he said, "Well, he was wearing this dark coat." And I was like, "Okay, that seems strange." And he has the big beard. And Philippe didn't have a beard. Philippe was very boyish looking. And I maybe this was unfair, but I went downstairs to my dad's study where all the Red House things were. And there's a portrait of Israel Hatch with his big white beard. And I brought it to Joe and I said, "Is this the guy you saw?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, that's the guy." And I said, "Well, he died in 1921. And so then Joe like freaked out, goes running downstairs, and like, he was a very traumatic person. And he like sees my sister, meets them for the first time, sort of screaming about a ghost. And my sister Kim was basically just so blasé, like kind of like Mr. Hatch, like just, "Oh yeah, Israel, he just shows up. Lots of people when they visit, they see Israel. He just likes to check people out. He's harmless." And he is harmless because I've read his diaries, and he's so harmless. He's just the sweetest, goofiest big nerd. He would take the barometric pressure and wind direction 4 times a day when he was a teenager. And
Oh
he's
my gosh.
a very nerdy. He had a huge crush on this girl in his school who he eventually married, Carrie B. Oakman. And he's just the sweetest person. But yeah, so I was never afraid of Israel, but people who visit the house have reported seeing him. So,
Wow.
yeah. Okay, so this is a picture of me and my siblings, and this is behind the red house. I'm the farthest on the right, kind of looking a little bit grumpy in my nightgown, and I'm standing in front of Kim, my oldest sister, who I mentioned, and I'm next to Susie, my twin sister, who went through this phase of dressing like a boy. And she was out of her pajamas, it seems, in this picture. And it's also, you can tell that it was 1976. So it's the bicentennial because of this flag behind us. And the other thing I wanted to point out, so there's Carrie, Kate, Patrick, Kim, Sarah, Susie, Becca, and Jess. And there's only one sibling, Stacy, who's my second brother, isn't in this picture. Behind us is this apple tree that the Hatches had planted. It was this beautiful apple tree, and we built this jungle gym thing on it. But you'll see this giant pile of towels because it was summer, and we would spend so much time at the river, and we would just come back with all of these wet bathing suits and towels, and my mom would put them on the jungle gym. So it was just a wonderful childhood to like be going back and forth to the river and yeah, being outside. So
I love how you've intertwined the two stories because for you they were very intertwined. And I think,
oh yeah, so this is a picture of the Red House today, and I did want to say that my mom, my twin sister Susie are listening from the Red House right now, and they're probably in this like little picture window there's the back side of the house and the front side of the house, and they're probably in the kitchen listening right now. Yeah, this is what it looks like today. When we did the renovation, we put red clapboards back on the front and back of the house, and then we put some cedar shake shingles. Originally the house, when we bought it, it had all shingles but painted a very bright red, and it was originally a clapboard house, so we kind of did a combination of two different New England styles when we did the renovation. And it is on the National Historic Register. And yeah, my dad passed away like 3 years ago, but my mom is still living there. So one of the things that I'm going to try to do, depending on COVID, if I get to go home in December, is to work with my mom to donate all these hatch materials to the Massachusetts Archive, the Mass Historical Society, so that Hatch descendants can find them. I mean, in writing the book, I really realized how history is so strange in that letters can get moved, can get passed down to somebody who then moves to another state, and then they might donate them to somewhere, you know, in Ohio when it's actually from New England, the letters, and history is just so strange that way. So I was very lucky as a writer to have all this material in the house, and that Richard Warren Hatch was a writer himself. And also my research had a lot to do with filling in gaps of like, what was it like to live in this time period? So I would research, you know, how did you make red paint? How did you, you know, how did you make linen? How did you build ships on a river? You know, like those kinds of things. Like, what was it like to work in a mill, a sawmill or a shoe peg mill, or these different kinds of mills they had, just so I could fill out the story a little more. And sometimes I think sometimes I didn't have a lot of information about the Hatches because, you know, paper was scarce or the letters are gone. During the Revolutionary War was a particularly difficult time. And I actually used some material from the Clements archive. They have a collection of, I don't know how to describe it, but like squealers, basically people in Marshfield who were like like turning their neighbors in, saying they were militiamen to the crown. And none of the hatches were in there, but it was a very funny, it was interesting because you remember like no one thought, a lot of people didn't think that the revolution was going to succeed. I mean, like the crown, I mean, the British had a humongous army. And so a lot of people were like, I'm just going to stay on this side and be a Tory, and like, I'm turning my neighbor in. And it's just interesting. So I had to like pull together a lot of different things to like make each historical chapter going forward. And then the other chapters follow like our family up until the restoration. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that piece of it, because I think that, you know, the how you go about researching and what you're looking for is always really interesting to people. So I know that you had mentioned, I think one of your siblings taught had a comment about your book after you wrote it, and was saying, you know, that um, how much your dad loved the house. And
yeah, that was my sister Jess, who's also on this call, and she would joke and she would say, "Thanks for writing Dad's book." And like my dad, he would be so thrilled today to be on this call, but he may have just jumped in and talked and told stories because he was a great storyteller. And that's kind of where this all started, was there was all these great stories that my dad would tell and about the house. And he loved having people come over and he would show them around. And he kind of felt like an adopted son of Richard Warren Hatch. And um, yeah, and he one time he said to me, "Oh, I'm reading your book all the way through now, and the history chapters and everything, and it's really good, those history chapters." And I said, "You've already read the book a couple of times. What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I only read the parts that I was in." And so, but one thing I want to say about my dad, which is he never met a stranger. He was such a generous person. And one thing that was really strange about the Hatch family is that the Richard Warren Hatch didn't talk to his brother at all. They had a real falling out. And he had some sons, and those sons didn't talk to the other cousins. And so there were these grandchildren from these two brothers who had never met. And my dad decided to throw this party when the book came out at the Red House, and some of those Hatch descendants, direct descendants, had never been to their grandfather's house. They'd never met their cousins. So it was a really intense, kind of beautiful thing that they got to meet. And my family got to be close with them. Yeah, so that was a really good sort of result of the book, of bringing the family back together. But I really feel so many people I wrote in the chat earlier, so many Hatches in America can trace themselves back to Walter, that I feel like it's important to have these documents be in a place where where they'll be preserved, and then future generations can look at them.
yeah, yeah. Well, as somebody who works at a repository of historical information, I wholeheartedly support that idea, because it is great for the family to know that there is a place to go look at them, and that they don't get lost as they're passed around. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much for sharing about all of this, and I'm sure people will have lots of questions for you. So we'll get to those at the end. So keep putting your questions in the Q&A section, everyone. All right, we're running a little bit long, but I hope that Kay is still on the phone, and
I am.
Oh, good. Thank you, Kay. We'll talk to you a little bit about your work at the Clements. So in 2007, we at the Clements acquired a set of bound diaries written by Anne Price Gibson, a Quaker, oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. That is indeed what you're going to talk about, but I wanted to
Right.
mention first that you've used your genealogical skills in volunteer work that you do, transcribing and researching various manuscripts. And that is indeed the collection that we'd like you to talk about, because that's where you really put those skills to work. So can you share with us the story about your research on those diaries?
That's very true, Anne. There were 6 diaries in all, and they were, of course, written by Anne Price Gibson, and she was a Quaker minister, as you said. And the series of diaries were written between 1820 and 1855, and they recorded Anne's daily life in Pennsylvania, her travels and attendance at Quaker meetings, and her religious views. Because there were names of different families mentioned in her diaries, Cheney tasked me with finding out more about this family and its possible connections to other materials in our collections. So I, of course, went online and used the various genealogical sites that are available to me. And the information was limited simply because, and this is an example, the census records only showed the name of the head of household and the number of females and their approximate ages and the number of males, and again, their approximate ages, but not names. This information was available later on, around 1850 in the census. So, decided, because these names had been coming up, go to the Allen County Library in Fort Wayne. They are the largest repository of genealogical information, second to Salt Lake City. They have many, many, many family histories written by family members, and they're bound in books. And so I searched these, and there was no doubt in my mind that these families were all connected. Families that appeared in Anne Gibson Price's diaries were indeed all related. And I found other diaries written by the various families: Joseph Price, Nathan Scoville, Pascal. All of these family names showed up, and there were pictures, and there was a good deal of consistency among the families and their experiences and stories. So there was no doubt in my mind that the families in our collections could be joined together under one title. And that's how I came to find. I had to go on site, which is always fun to do.
Right. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for explaining, how you can use that research on behalf of the Clements. Are there any other materials that you've worked on that really stand out?
There was a very interesting gentleman who lived in Maryland, and he resided at Locust Level. And Locust Level is located between Frederick, Maryland, and Baltimore, Maryland. And he was a farmer, and we received his letter book, and it was comprised of ongoing business and personal correspondence, of course, from about 1826 to 1830. But in this book, he also wrote letters to his brother who lived in Kentucky, and he wrote about his hallucinations and alcoholism. He was definitely an alcoholic, and he was extremely paranoid. And I think by today's standards, he would probably, this is my own opinion, a paranoid schizophrenic. He shared in his letters with his brother that he believed devils were going to kill him. And he also told his brother that he dreamt that he was going to kill him. And he felt strongly that feeling continued, that his brother was going to kill him. He also felt that he had 7 children, and he felt 4 of them were not his. He felt that a doctor in Frederick was one of the fathers, and he listed names of other people, other men in town. So whenever he was overcome with paranoia, he sought solace with Father McElroy, who was the pastor of the Catholic Church in Frederick. And Father would minister to him, and he'd counsel him, and he'd harbor him. He'd let him stay when these paranoid delusions overcame him, and he was terrified to stay alone. So, and then in October of 1831, John Hughes walked out of a boarding house with no coat, no shoes, no socks, and quote unquote, he met his melancholy end by falling in the basin. This occurred at Fells Point in Baltimore. So that was in 1831. So he was a very, very troubled, sad man. And then during my research, when you go on Ancestry, on the sidebar, they will tell you a section where it says other members who are interested in the same person that you're interested in. So I went there, and I found there was a Jesuit priest, Father Doyle, who was searching Mary Ann Naylor, who was John Hughes' either wife or common-law wife. We couldn't find a marriage record for the 2 of them. And so he was interested in sharing information, and Cheney and he communicated with me also. And one of the things that Father Doyle shared with us that he found in the census that Mary Ann Naylor and her slave and her children moved while John was still living in the house next door to the church of Father McElroy, and was probably his housekeeper. And she died in 1847, and we assume that she worked there until her death. So the whole journal was very, very interesting, and was extremely different than what we're used to seeing in collections.
Right. And so finding some of those other sources and other people who are doing the research is an interesting way to fill out the story. So
it is.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people will have questions for you. So thank you so much for telling us at least a couple of the tidbits of the work that you've done at the Clements. And we'll see what questions we have. All right, everybody. Oops, I forgot to click forward. There's the John Hughes letter book. I want to do just a couple of wrap up announcements, and then we'll get to the questions. Coming up on December 18th, we'll be hosting an author conversation with Martha Kennedy. She'll be talking about her book, Drawn to Purpose, American Women Illustrators and Cartoonists. Once you're registered for the Bookworm, you'll receive a reminder for that event, and you can choose to join us live or wait for the email with the link and the resources that we send out on Friday afternoons. In addition, thank you so much, Kate Moore, for sponsoring today's episode. And I also want to announce that our lecture series from the fall, our September and October lecture recordings, are now available on our website, so you can look for those as well. we have launched an amazing and fun way to learn more about the acquisitions, the conservation, and the digitization at the Clements Library. So take a look at our Adopt a Piece of History site. It's a lot of fun to see some of these materials and to read more about them. So that's a great resource. And perhaps as you look through them, you'll be inspired to adopt an item yourself or in honor of someone during this holiday gift giving season. And also spread the word. Tell everybody you know about our programs and about Adopt a Piece of History. We appreciate that camaraderie and community very much. So let us know also if you're interested in sponsoring a future episode of the Bookworm. And now we'll get to the questions. All right, let's see what we have out there. Okay, let me find Wendy. We'll get her shown back up again. All right, so Linda is asking, my direct ancestors lived in Salem, Massachusetts. 7 of them lost their lives because of false accusations of being witches. My 7th great-grandparents, Sarah and Edward Bishop, made a jailbreak after 37 weeks of imprisonment. They had been accused because they let their neighbors play games and have a drink in their home. Oh, so Linda's giving us some tales from our earlier poll question. So thank you, Linda. Those are great stories. We before we got going today, talked a lot about the surprising things that we find as we do the research. So thank you so much for sharing that. Let's see. Oh, we got to get Wendy back up. Let's see. And, but in the meantime, I have a question for Sarah. Janet's saying, I'm guessing that the Red House has been listed on the National Register of Historic Places. If so, when was that done, and has the status contributed to the property's preservation?
Yes. So the Red House is actually, with the Hatch Mill, a National Historic Site. So there's like a piece of property that includes the Red House and the Hatch Mill, and it's actually on Wikipedia. And then also the house itself is on the register. We've been doing a lot of research about this, my family, because one of the things I promised my dad when he died was that I would, preserve the house. Like, this was one of the last things I said to him, was like, the house is going to be okay, don't worry about it. And Marshfield is becoming this really fancy place to live, which it wasn't when I grew up there. And the thing that I discovered is that it's more protected being as a National Historic Site than just a home on the National Historic Register. Being on the National Historic Register does not necessarily preserve your home. It only applies to the outside, first of all. So you could, somebody could come in and gut the whole inside of a house, and it could still, they wouldn't get in trouble. Mostly the National Historic Register has to do with they can't tear it down if a highway's going through there. But even then, it's not a guaranteed preservation of the house. And so we've actually been kind of looking into these kind of bonds for the internal structure of the house to be maintained, because there's so much in the Red House, the inside of the Red House, that's historic. There's this old, really, really old part of the oldest part of the house is the staircase that goes down into the basement. That's probably from it's from the 1600s based on the logs. But yeah, so it's kind of a longer conversation, but it's more preserved, it's more secure being with the hatch mill. And that happened, well, the house itself went on the register right after the book came out. I didn't work on that. We had someone else work on it. Obviously, it was pretty easy to do that. You know, because we had all this material. But then Roy Kirby, who's this great person in Marshfield, he had this whole push for the saving the hatch mill, and he was instrumental. He worked with my dad to kind of make the historic site of the hatch family area. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Wendy, we have a question from one of your cookie friends. Janet's asking, are there still gaps in the story of Tiger, Bill, and Kate that you're trying to fill in? And, or some of those details you just think will never be knowable?
I think I've exhausted. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because for some reason, I can only see your little box, but that's okay as long as you can hear me. It's most important, I guess. I think that I've exhausted all of my resources. I really struggled, you know, for example, to get the information from those cousins from Wichita. I was very grateful that they entrusted me with the file, which I you know, was delighted to receive, and I dealt with it. I went through it all and I returned it to them. I mean, I'll certainly keep my eyes and ears peeled, but I feel that I'm probably done for, at least for now.
Right, right. So, all right, thank you. And Sarah Peters asking, was the mill run by the waters of the North River?
No, actually, there was a stream, a 2-mile brook. The area where the hatches were is often called 2 Mile. But there's a stream that runs to the North River, and the hatches made 3 ponds. They dammed it, and there were 3 mills on those ponds. And those ponds are still there. And like one thing that's cool is that you would think that the oldest person in the house would want the red house, but that wasn't the case, because it was sort of the house where the dowagers were, and like the person who never got married, and you know, some cousin comes back to live. The oldest sons always would get land from that Walter had and sort of piece it off. And so in Marshfield, what's really neat is in 2 Mile, there's all these hatch houses all around, and they're all kind of in the 3 different ponds. And so you can kind of see this like map almost of the family and how it's spread out. But yeah, it was actually going to the river. The 2 Mile brook is where it was, what the mills were run on.
Thank you. Janet is asking, what kind of software do you use to keep your research in order and your sources documented? And I think part of this is for Kay, but I think everybody probably can answer this. And she's saying it's interfacing with the collections and people, you know, trying to keep it all aligned. So Kay, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, since I'm a little computer illiterate, I keep a lot of paper files, and I have a file cabinet, and so they are physical collections. I don't have them online, and so I bring them out. I did and looked them over and read them and went through my research. There's an anecdote I'd like to add. If there are any other researchers out there, family history, the Salt Lake City Mormon website we search no longer has, and they no longer send history centers of computers that if you put them in, see the primary sources, the originals online, but you have to go physically to the family history centers. I started doing that, which is it's a plus because there's so much information in the primary sources. Thank you.
Right. So you broke up a little bit, but you're talking about the changes in how people can view those primary sources that the Mormon Church has. It's not as easy
Correct.
to look at them online anymore.
Correct.
Right. Right. So how about Sarah or Wendy? Do you have any thoughts about keeping your research in order?
Well, um, one thing I want to say is that what's great about the reason why all the Hatch materials survived is because they were in the house. And you think about archival paper as a body. Like, so it's like if your body's like feeling fine with the temperature, then the paper is fine. So it's like if you're in an attic where it's really hot or really cold, like that's not good, or like a basement where it's really wet and damp. So fortunately, these papers were just like in this room in the house. There also were old enough that they didn't really have any acid in them, so they stayed preserved. But I don't know, I'm a real like physical person, and also I'm confronting this having taught for 25 years and now I'm having to do everything virtually. I'm a person who like writes notes on people's poems, and I liked to go and see the document. So like when I got to go to the Mass Historical Society and they brought out that piece of paper that Josiah Wampatuck had made the X with, and they have, you have to wear gloves and it's like in a special thing. But still, just seeing the actual document that at one point he touched was just so profound for me. Same with the wills in the house and things like that. So I do think that digitizing is really great for people, especially during COVID, who like can't travel. But for me personally, I love seeing the object, like seeing the actual piece of, yeah, just I mean, Harvard is great. They've put all of their archives mostly on Google. And so they've got the Houghton and they've got the Schlesinger Library that has this women's history stuff. All of that is accessible, which is really wonderful. But again, I mean, there's nothing like seeing the original paper. That's just my response.
Yeah.
I agree.
Wendy, do you have anything to add to this discussion?
Well, it just reminded me of how I felt holding that letter from Tiger Bill, that came in the file from Wichita that I was so wanting so very much, and that was a thrill, that I was holding in my hands this frail, precious little document from 1902 that he had actually written. Kate. The only other thing that I would say is I'm kind of old-fashioned about my my operation. If I ever do come to acquire documents of historical value, I would work very hard to make sure that they are sent ultimately to a repository like the William Clements Library or a local historical society, because things can be lost. I've actually tried to trace the documents. I know that at one point when I spoke to the person in Wichita about those papers, when I sent them back to her, there was a plan to ultimately get them to Wichita State, which I guess is the big repository for such documents out there. And I tried to track that, and as of a few months ago, they hadn't received them, which is very painful to think about. I mean, life intervenes. You know, people get sick, and for example, but if it's at all possible to get these precious old documents to the right place for the generations to come, I would I would urge people not to let it go, not to waste time or put it off.
Yes, yes. Here, here. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you. So Rex is wondering, Sarah, if you painted the red house.
Oh yeah, many times. We, my dad had his own work crew of his children. So yeah, I learned a lot about house painting. I actually had my own house painting business after graduate school based on all of my experience. My dad also restored a house in Vermont that my sister Jess now lives in, and we went up there a lot too. I would always say, like, we were growing up in this very almost like rustic old house, and then for fun we'd go to this schoolhouse in Vermont that had like no electricity, no running water. Like, hey, let's have a vacation in an even more rustic place. And like, but yeah, I did, and we. I mean, I painted it several times when it was just all the shingles, which was a lot of work, scraping those shingles and then painting the white. It had white trim for a while. And then the final, like the painting with the clapboards, I was involved in that too. And I also personally redid what do you call it? Not caulking, but I redid all the window panes. There's like 16, those little tiny, I redid all the windows in the red house. That was sort of my job. So I'm really good at that now.
Can you come to my house?
Thank you. So I think we answered Janet's question about a repository, but Linda and Jim are wondering, Sarah, if the Hatch family left you furnishings as well as historical documents.
Yes, and I'm going to ask my mom, who's watching, to text me if I am forgetting something. Yes, they left furnishings, and a lot of one of the main ones was Israel H. Hatch's bed, which
Wow.
was the one who was the ghost, and maybe that's why he's haunting the house, because we still have his canopy bed that's up. My sister Susie grew up sleeping in that bed, and I think some other things too. It's hard to remember because my parents also did a lot of work, mostly my dad, like going and trying to get all of these historical things with the house. The house was not modern. Like everything looked very historical, not very comfortable. Like we had a basement that had some beanbag chairs and futon couch and TV, but like, and a pool table. But like everything else was like old timey. A camelback couch, I think, was a Hatch thing. There are quite a few objects that were. We have one of the original windows, like with the leaded glass, that was in the closet with all this other stuff. So yes, they did leave some furniture.
Oh, interesting. Um, let's see. So David is asking what the best sources are for Quaker research. One of his ancestors was a student at the Quaker school in Nine Partners, New York in the 1840s. I don't know if anybody has thoughts about that.
There is a Quaker website for genealogy. And I think if you Google in Quaker research, in fact, I have a copy of it in the other room. And there is a definite site, and it tells you the steps and how to go about finding Quaker genealogy. It's a very, very good site. All you have to do is Google it.
That's great. Well, Kay, maybe you can email that to me and I'll send it on to David.
Okay, I can do that.
Great, thank you. Let's see. And Valerie is asking Sarah what your long-term plans are to pass down the Hatch House. Clearly, it's the sort of home that needs to be cared for by good historical stewards.
Yeah, we're working on that. The land, a lot of the land and a lot of our neighbors' land has been donated to the watershed preservation town of Marshfield. So there's a lot of, like, so when I was growing up, there was a lot of land, and now most of it is owned by the town of Marshfield, and there's all these beautiful walking trails, and it's being maintained by Wildlands Trust, I think. Yeah, you know, the most important thing for us right now is that my mom wants to be able to stay in the Red House. And like I said earlier, we're going to work this winter on donating all of the genealogical material to an archive where it'll be preserved. Probably the Mass Historical Society is what we are thinking. And in terms of the house, you know, it would be wonderful if a family member would take it. If not, there's several options to, you know, find a person who, or find a institution that would want to preserve the house and, you know, keep, because it's an old house and it was lived in forever. So it's creaky and it has issues. And so, yeah, it's not one of these like houses that has the granite countertops and like the stainless steel everything, but it looks old on the outside. It's old. So and yeah, it has the original sill and all that stuff. So but we're just taking it one day at a time, and most importantly, my mom, it's really important for her to be able to stay there because it's really her home and what she calls home more than anything in her life. And so, and my dad is totally haunting the place now. He's like everywhere there, and she feels like she's never apart from him because his stuff is like he decorated, and his essence is there. So she doesn't.
Right, exactly.
So we'll see, but we're definitely, like I said, that was my last promise to my dad, and I feel a lot of pressure about that. So our family, there's 9 kids in our family, so we're definitely all on board with trying to make sure the Red House is preserved.
Yeah, that's so lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Kay, and thanks, Sarah and Wendy. Thank you so much for sharing today. This has been a great discussion, and you know, such a wonderful exploration of history through you know, these personal connections. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day and weekend.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for attending, and thank you, Wendy and Kate. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks too for me as
And
well.
thank you for including me.
Yes,
It
I'm
was
so
fun.
glad that you got on. So, all
So
right.
am I.
Thanks.
It was a real honor